Today I'm going to compare the McLaren P1 and the Porsche 918 Spyder, two cars from the Holy Trinity and two cars which are actually similarly priced in today's market, but which one should you buy? We're going to look at all the details. We're going to look at the design, the performance, we're going to look at collectability, we're going to look at reliability, we'll look at future values and try and help you decide which one you should buy. Just before we get into this video, I just wanted to remind our UK viewers of our sister company, Elevate Finance. So they actually finance a lot of hypercars like these two. So if you do have a hypercar you want to finance, please do get in touch. We'll leave their details below. So we're going to start off looking at the exterior designs and comparing them. We'll start off with the P1. So if you read any of the sort of McLaren press packs about this car or watch interviews with the designer, it was very clear that they had an absolute mission to make this the best driver's car in the world. So a lot of the design is based around downforce and aerodynamics, and it's meant to look like a very sort of purposeful racer, so it sits really low down. But look, it's very much a case of form equals function. They have not sacrificed beauty. I think this is one of the most beautiful cars of the generation. It's aged incredibly well. But look, just walking around the car quickly, obviously you've got that circular front end, the big nostrils in the bonnet. The McLaren headlights are actually designed to be like the McLaren swoosh logo. Very cool feature, I think, there. That massive windscreen, which is very, very shallow, but quite different to the 918. I'll show you in a minute. Loads of exposed carbon. Look at those doors. And I love looking over the top of the shoulders straight into that big gaping door. And obviously this is where you actually open the door, which come up like butterfly doors. So you have that glass roof. You've also got the carbon fiber roof snorkel, which is just an amazing feature, obviously feeding airflow, and it actually distributes it either side into the turbochargers for cooling. And then you have sort of hidden away, you have these secret little flaps, which is basically where you fit your charger in to charge up the battery. You can top up your oil, and on the other side is where you fill up your fuel, but nicely integrated into the body of the car. Then you have these sort of where you normally have rear windows. These are all exposed carbon. There's even a secret little air intake in there as well. And then I love these air intakes here, which are beautifully sort of sculpted like a fin and so close to the body. That kind of shows you what the whole shrink wrap design is. It's a design inspired by nature. Frank Stephenson, the designer, talks about how they tried to make it like a cheetah, how the skin is wrapped so tightly over the body, so the rest of the car is wrapped so tightly over the mechanical hard point, so there is no excess weight, that it's super lean. So they've been fanatic about sort of taking all weight out of the car. Onto the rear of the car, so you have that beautiful view of the engine. You can see all the carbon fiber engine covers with that P1 logo. So you have this huge rear wing, part of the active aerodynamics. Obviously the wing does go down, but really for that iconic P1 silhouette, you want it as high up as possible. All that beautiful open mesh where you can see really into the guts of the car. And again, one of the most distinctive design features of the P1 is that rear tail light. So distinctive, runs the whole way around so beautifully. The indicators are also integrated. If you've ever followed a P1 at night with a tail light, you literally cannot mistake the car for anything other than a P1. Massive, aggressive rear diffuser and that beautiful central exhaust. But such an iconic design, and personally I think it has aged incredibly well. Okay, so now onto the 918 design, and unlike the P1, which had that sort of simple mission just to be the best driver's car in the world, the 918 has clearly got a much broader mission. It's got a wider spectrum of abilities to showcase, and I think you can see that in the design. It's a more balanced design. It's certainly more understated, but let's show you around a few little bits. So I think where you'll notice the bonnet sits a little bit lower, so you get these big curved front wings, but that's giving you better visibility out the front. That very distinctive design alloy, which you have not seen anywhere else. You can obviously upgrade those for magnesium wheels as part of the Visac package. You've got the little air intake there, which is just releasing some of the hot air from the brakes. You've got this air intake which runs down the whole side of the car. That's a real distinctive design piece there for the 918. You do see a little bit of exposed carbon on the roll hoop, but it's nothing quite like the P1, which has got a lot more going on. You do have the exposed fuel cap, you've got the e-power cap, the other side for the charger, not hidden away like it is on the P1. But for me, it's all about this engine cover, which is a little bit similar to the Carrera GT, but it's got a sharper design, and then you have the exhaust in the engine cover, sort of right behind the headrest, just helping with that noise. You've also got an active aero like you do on the P1. It doesn't sit quite as high as it does on the P1. Does look very cool though, and then just beautifully sculpted. It is quite a broad car, and then you get that lovely rear diffuser all in carbon, that sort of double diffuser, little rear camera there, just for that extra convenience which the P1 doesn't have. So which one has the better design? Look, certainly in terms of styling, it's a very subjective thing. Personally, I used to prefer the 918. I thought it was a bit slicker, a bit prettier. I like the understatedness of it. But the P1 has really grown on me over the years, especially as I've started to understand the car a lot more, the philosophy behind it, that shrink wrap design, and it's got a lot more going on. So I think P1 for me just gets the edge on this one. Just before we go on to the interiors, I just wanted to mention the two paints on these cars because they're both quite special. So on the P1, this is called MSO Kilo Grey. It was actually originated from a special one-off project called Project Kilo on a 650S, which was just a mad custom spec by MSO, and they came up with this unique grey. It actually doesn't really do it justice in this lighting. When you take it into the sun, it really comes alive. It's a really sparkly metallic grey, just really, really classy and nice. And then on the 918 Spyder, this is called liquid metal silver. This was actually one of two special colors they did, the other one being liquid chrome. But it's basically a 9-layer paint, and it's meant to give the car a sort of liquid metal appearance, which is different to a metallic or a pearlescent. It's a €48,000 option, and I just think an incredibly special paint. Right, so now onto the interiors. So we'll compare both the cabins and the different sort of materials and the practicality elements. So starting off with the P1, so as you open those doors, you're going to be greeted by these bucket seats. So these have become known as the P1 seat. So because they're available on some of the later McLaren models, quite a few people actually prefer these seats to the Senna seats, which are a bit more extreme and ultra lightweight. But look, just getting in, they are relatively easy to get into, and they're just quite comfortable. They are a snug fit, so if you are a larger gentleman, it might be a little bit of a squeeze, but they sit you in nice and snug. And that's one of the first things you'll notice when you sit in a P1, is just how sort of tight it is in here. It's very much a cockpit. Everything feels very close to you. Everything's angled towards you. That center screen is angled towards you. The whole side curves in, and it is a perfect driving position. The other thing is you've got the glass canopy roof, so the visibility is actually very good around you. It's a lot of glass. It really does feel like you're in a spaceship, and then you've got everything here in front of you. So carbon fiber is obviously the other big theme of the interior. So you may know that McLaren were the company that first built a carbon fiber tub, both for a Formula One car and for a road car with the McLaren F1. So they are the masters of creating that carbon tub, and you are just surrounded by carbon fiber everywhere you look. It is mainly satin carbon fiber, but you do get gloss carbon fiber on the door sill. You also get the little plaque here showing which build number your car is. This is number 355. I don't believe it was built in order, so you could, as the first owner, actually select which number you want, obviously assuming someone else hadn't already selected that number. But other than that, we've got quite a lot of Alcantara in here. Some of the Alcantara elements do feel don't integrate all that well. They feel a little bit plonked on the dashboard, but obviously Alcantara is the sort of choice for the racing cars. Then you've got your center console here. This is where you've got all your navigation, your Bluetooth, your climate controls. You know, it's not the highest quality system you've ever used, but it does the job. And you've got your little modes down here, so you can select your track mode, you can go into the EV mode if you want to go completely stealth and silent. But then you've got your steering wheel. So McLaren actually got their Formula One drivers at the time to scan their hands so they could create the perfect shaped steering wheel. So a lot of thought's gone into the steering wheel. You've got your DRS button and your iPass button, which we'll touch on a bit later. But yeah, everything is so in a perfect position. Then you've got your storage, or shall I say lack of storage. There's not a lot of places to put things in here. You do have a little cubby hole here where you can fit a bottle of water. There is a little area just behind the center console here. There is an ashtray there, not that this car's ever been smoked in, but you can fit a little bit there. Obviously you don't get cubby holes in the doors because the doors go up, everything would fall out, but you do get quite a good, surprisingly good storage space up front. So you open the P1 boot actually by just pressing this little secret button in there, and it opens up what I think is a pretty reasonably sized front boot for a car like a P1. You might not expect it. Currently you've got a little fire extinguisher and your first aid kit, but you could easily fit a little weekend bag, but it looks pretty amazing, surrounded by carbon fiber too. So now onto the 918 interior, and a lot of Porsche owners will be very familiar with these seats, the full bucket seats, or widely known as the 918 seats, as they've got the carbon in the headrest. These seats are fixed, they don't fold, but getting in, I've always found these seats pretty easy to live with personally. Obviously you'll see them in a lot of GT3s, GT3 RSs, but they are still pretty snug, definitely not as tight fitting as the P1, but they're still very sort of upright, still feel very sort of race focused, but I just think they're a little bit easier to live with. Certainly if you want to use a car every day or do longer journeys, they're just a little bit more friendly, should I say, than the P1 seats. But the other thing you'll instantly notice as you sit in a 918 after a P1 is it just feels a little bit more spacious, you feel a little bit more relaxed, there's lots of tech around you, and the whole cabin just feels that level above in terms of luxury, in terms of sort of plushness. Obviously you've got, again, lots of carbon fiber, not quite as much as you do in the P1, but really nice contrast of gloss carbon. You get a little bit of satin carbon just under the windscreen and the top of the doors, but it does just feel a very sort of high-end place to be. Obviously you've got your steering wheel, there's a lot more going on the steering wheel as well. You've got your driving mode selector actually on the steering wheel, so you can go from hybrid to sport to E-mode much easier than you can on the P1. And then you've got this big center console, so that's much more dominant than it is on the P1. It really divides the driver and the passenger seats, and the control system I think are a lot more intuitive than they are on the P1. So really nice tech, the buttons feel very good, and the nice thing about it is when you're not using it, it actually goes completely dark, so it looks very minimalistic and unobtrusive. So in terms of the actual storage capacity here, so a bit like the P1, you get that little center storage cubby hole here. Not a lot you can fit in there, to be honest. There is a little area behind the center console, but there's not actually an area to sort of put something, so it will probably roll off. You do get a little cup holder, it is detachable, so if you don't want that, you can take it off. You do, though, get a couple of cubby holes in each door. As these are more traditional doors, you can squeeze a couple of items in there. You've got the Burmester surround sound, which is a really great system. You can actually hear it as well if you've got the roof off and going along at quite a fast pace. You can still hear the music, which is pretty impressive. So unlike the P1, you don't get a push button start button. You get the traditional put your key in and twist to start her up. And then you do get this quite cool little stubby gear lever to go from drive or to reverse, and your little park button there too. But other than that, you do also have the front boot, which I'll show you now. So on the 918, like the P1, you do get this decent luggage space up front, but it is a bit more of a traditional luggage space, a bit more room than you do get on the P1. But you do have to think, if you want to take your roof, it does slot in here. There is still room, even when the roof panels are stored up here. You can still squidge in a few bags, and it is still a pretty practical car to go for a weekend away. So two very different interiors. Obviously the P1 is much more race focused, much snugger fit, and it does feel very special in there. But for me, the 918 is just a nicer place to be. The whole environment, the tech, the materials just feels that level above. So for me, and as well, you get the roof off, so it does feel that extra spacious. So for me, the 918 does get the edge on this section. Right, so now moving on to the performance and the sort of driving experience of both cars. Unfortunately, we're not going to take both of these cars out. They are for sale, but look, there's loads of videos online and reviews. You can read a lot more about it. I'm just going to touch on the important points. So just starting with the P1, so that engine is the 3.8 litre V8, derived from the 12C, but with just a lot more power thanks to the double turbochargers with much higher pressure, so you get a lot more power. And then of course you have that electric motor, and you get that iPass system, instant power assist. That's one of the buttons on the steering wheel which you can press, and the electric motor kicks in, giving you that extra power. So other things to take note of, obviously this active aero, the rear wing, which is basically like a race car, that is giving you so much downforce. They said it was the most amount of downforce on a road car at the time on the P1. The other thing is you get DRS. Those Formula One fans, you'll know what DRS is. Basically flattens the wing, just reducing drag, and again that's the other button on the steering wheel, all helping with overtaking and better lap times. A couple of other technologies McLaren created for this car worth mentioning. So you have race active chassis control. That's just giving the P1 amazing body control, really massive contribution to those lap times because it gives you much flatter cornering. It's also got brake steer. That's now banned in Formula One because it gives the car too much of an advantage. That's basically helping the nose get much closer to the apex, gives you much more traction as you come out of corners. But yeah, all these things are just making the P1 an absolute animal on the track. So what's the P1 actually like to drive? I mean, obviously it's extremely fast. It's a little bit hairy. You could say it's a little bit skittish at times. It doesn't always do what exactly you think it's going to do. So it is a little bit on edge, but it is that challenging drive is all the more rewarding. Obviously being a carbon fiber tub, it is pretty stiff. You are going to feel each sort of bump in the road, each little pebble that flicks up, you're going to feel it, you're going to hear it. But that's all part of the experience. And you know, when you put your foot down, you get this incredible sort of turbo whoosh. Obviously the induction from the roof scoop adds to that. But it is just, you know, a very rewarding car to drive. Every time you're going to drive it, you're going to get that sense of occasion. So onto the performance now for the 918 and some of the technical elements. So very different powertrain to the P1. On the 918 you get 4.6 litre naturally aspirated V8. So no turbochargers in sight here at all, but you do get two electric motors instead of one on the P1. You get one in the back and one in the front. So yes, does add a bit of weight to the car. It is a bit heavier than the P1, but because of that extra battery power, you've got a lot more torque. So I think it's 1200 Newton meters instead of 900, and you've got a higher RPM. So in the lower gears, the 918 actually feels a little bit faster perhaps, a little bit more engaging because you get that torque in the lower gears. The other big difference with the 918 is you get four-wheel drive. So rear-wheel drive on the P1, that's obviously going to give you a bit more grip, a bit more acceleration from a standstill, and a bit more stability. So the 918 is actually probably a better car to use all year round. Being four-wheel drive, you can use it a bit more frequently in the wet, and probably makes it a better daily driver. So some of the additional features on the 918, so you've got rear axle steering. I know that's quite a common thing now on some of the GT3 RSs, but back then it was quite a new feature, but that's definitely contributed to that those lap times and breaking the Nürburgring record at the time. You've also got regenerative braking, so during braking that actually harvests more energy in the car to keep the batteries firing on all cylinders. So that was quite a good bit of technology at the time. You've, again, like the P1, you do have active aero, so it doesn't go quite as high as the P1, but it's got, I think, quite a few more settings of different modes, and it really adjusts as to which driving mode you're in. But the main thing about the 918 is all these different systems, the four-wheel drive, the active aero, all these different things working in tandem. There's a lot more going on with the 918, and the amazing thing that Porsche have done is to make it all feel so seamless. You know, the drive is very consistent, and it really is just German engineering at its best. So how does the 918 compare to the P1 to drive? I mean, as you might expect, it does feel a bit more assured on the road. It feels more planted. You know, it does what you think it's going to do. You know, but it's still unbelievably quick. I mean, you've obviously got the four-wheel drive, which adds usability to it, so you can use it in a variety of driving occasions. Does it make the hairs stand up on your chest? I think it definitely does. Maybe not quite as much as the P1, but it's still ridiculously fast. All that extra torque, you feel that pace all the way through from lower down, all the way to the top, and it's still an amazingly exciting experience. And what makes it even better, see the fact you can take the roof off and then you've got the exhaust just behind your head, so you've got an amazing soundtrack as well. So what car has the better performance? Which is the better one to drive? I mean, obviously you can go off some of the stats, you might go off some of the lap times. You've probably seen the Grand Tour video where the 918 actually is quicker around a track, but that was with different drivers. If you've watched the Chris Harris video where he takes all three of the Holy Trinity out, the P1 is the quickest, and actually by some margin when it's got an optional Trofeo R tyres. So in terms of just outright performance, you could say the P1. It has got a bit more power, it has got a higher top speed, although the 918 does have a quicker 0 to 62. The other thing with the 918 is if it's not just about lap times, there's different types of driving, and I think the 918 does cover more bases when it comes to actually being able to use the car. But if it's just performance, you've got to go with the P1. Right, so now on to something that is pretty important for those long-term owners. It's the running costs, the reliability, and it's probably no secret for those of you who follow these cars closely that the P1 has got a few concerns, mainly about its battery. So you've probably heard a few horror stories of how much a battery is to replace, and yes, it is six-figure sums to replace a battery. And a lot of the early cars, early owners, obviously perhaps new to having a hybrid car, didn't plug them in regularly enough. You know, they are meant to be plugged in at all times when you're not driving it, and quite a few batteries did fail. So obviously being a big cost to replace the battery is one thing, but even worse, the company that actually created the batteries originally no longer exist. So that was a bigger problem in terms of the lead times to get a new battery. 2022, McLaren brought out a new upgraded battery. It was actually the Speedtail battery, slightly recalibrated for the P1. I've heard it's not a perfect solution, having other problems with those as well. But the good news is a company in the UK called V Engineering are developing a brand new battery with for the P1. They've got actually, they're teaming up, they're all ex-McLaren sort of master technicians, and they're teamed up with the people that made the original battery for the P1 and creating this brand new, fully advanced battery with a long warranty. And the beauty of it, I'm led to believe, is you don't have to replace it. It's repairable, there's cells you can take out and sort of repair. So that's going to give P1 owners massive peace of mind, and I think that's why, part of the reason why you're starting to see a bit of resurgence in the market for the P1, because there's this new battery coming that is going to hopefully solve a lot of these problems. Batteries aside, there are still other things to consider with the P1. It is a little bit fragile. This is a McLaren. They're not known for their perfect reliability, so you have to take a little bit of a pinch of salt when you buy one. But there's little things, shock absorbers, very expensive if you go through McLaren. Again, V-Engineering, better place to go through to bring down those costs. Few issues with hydraulics. To service it, you're talking about 5 to 6 grand a year if you service it every year, which it should do ideally, but not all P1 get serviced every year. But look, compare that to the 918. German engineering, German, hopefully reliability, and only have to service these every 2 years. Although this car, at the request of the owner, has been serviced every single year. Most 918s are serviced every 2 years. Servicing varies from like 3 to 4 grand. Every 4 years it's meant to have a major service. Those are more like 6 to 7 grand. And generally, there are not going to be loads of surprise costs with a 918. There are a few, we've had a few with pressure sensors and a few wishbone suspension joints that need replacing, but you're talking 2 grand here, 3 grand there, a few £100 here. As far as I know, and the 918 owners I've spoken to, they're very, very robust. You get a 7-year warranty on the battery. The P1 originally only had a 3-year warranty. Obviously now those warranties have lapsed and you cannot extend them on either car. But there are no sort of horror stories with the 918. So I think you're going to have quite a lot of a bit more peace of mind with the 918. But as I said before, with the P1, I think that new solution is going to take away a lot of those worries. So we're going to finish off talking about their collectibility, their importance, their future value. What might be the better buy for the future? Obviously, when talking about collectibles, you have to look at the rarity. And the McLaren P1 with 375 worldwide is significantly rarer than the 918, which there are 918 of. But the fact they're similarly priced obviously shows you that the 918 is a bit stronger in today's market. But what's really been holding the P1 back? When you think it's the spiritual successor to the McLaren F1, which goes for tens of millions of pounds, and this is really the next best thing that McLaren make. So you'd like to think it has a lot of potential in the future market. What's been really holding it back is what I've discussed before. When these battery issues came about and became sort of more public knowledge amongst P1 prospective owners, it did bring the prices back down. But that, I think, is about to change. I think the P1 is incredibly undervalued. You know, you look at the rarity, you look at the fact that both these cars are from that holy trinity, massive game changers, all-time greats. Everything about the P1, the design, the race ethos, you know, it's got so much going for it. And personally, I think the P1 is going to turn out to be a better buy financially in terms of its value. Obviously, the thing you have to factor in is the extra maintenance costs. You are going to spend more maintaining and running a P1 than you are a 918. But I do think both cars are good value today. You know, a lot of the hypercars that come out now are in the millions of pounds. You know, McLaren, there is going to be a P1 successor that's probably going to start at least with a 2 or maybe even 3 million. So the P1 today, I think, is a fantastic buy, and I also think the 918 is a good buy. The safer head of me would possibly go for a 918, but if you like a little bit of risk and the potential upside, I think is greater with a McLaren P1. So that is it. Which one should you buy, the McLaren P1 or the Porsche 918 Spyder? For me, it totally depends on the type of driving you want to do. If you just want to have an absolute blast for one go, you go for the P1. If you want something a bit more complete for a variety of driving trips, you go for the Porsche 918. But what would you choose and why would you choose it? Please do leave us your comments. Give us a thumbs up if you enjoyed the video. Please make sure you're subscribed to our channel, and we'll see you again next time.